The people carrying the trays usually know more secrets than the people raising the champagne. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering ballroom windows of the Ashford Grand Hotel, while Manhattan glittered beneath winter skies outside. Inside the Brooks family wedding reception, everything looked painfully perfect. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. White roses wrapped around golden pillars. A string quartet played slow violin music beneath warm amber lights, while photographers captured smiling guests, pretending happiness came naturally to rich people. Emily Carter moved quietly between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne glasses balanced carefully against one hand. Her black waitress uniform looked simple compared to the designer gowns and tailored tuxedos surrounding her, but she carried herself with the same calm precision she brought into every exhausting shift. Invisible, efficient, forgettable. That was usually how wealthy guests preferred their waitresses. Emily did not mind. People revealed the most about themselves when they believed nobody important was listening. Near the center stage beneath soft golden lighting stood Nathaniel Brooks beside his fiancée Victoria Hale, CEO of Brooks International. Magazine covers called him America's youngest self-made billionaire. Tonight, he looked exactly like the kind of man expensive weddings were built for. Perfect tuxedo, perfect smile, perfect life carefully arranged beneath expensive lights. Yet, even from across the ballroom, Emily noticed something strange about him. Nathaniel never fully relaxed. Every smile arrived half a second late. Every laugh sounded practiced, like someone performing confidence instead of feeling it. Table 16 needs fresh champagne, Olivia Grant whispered sharply while checking seating arrangements on a digital tablet. Emily nodded once and reached for another silver tray from the catering station. And be careful near the dance floor, Olivia added nervously. The press photographers are everywhere tonight. Emily adjusted the tray carefully against her palm. Understood. Across the ballroom, guests applauded softly as Nathaniel and Victoria posed for another photograph beside the massive wedding cake covered in white orchids and gold detailing. Emily stepped carefully through the crowded reception carrying champagne toward the VIP section while violin music floated gently through the air. Then someone backed suddenly into her path. One sharp movement. One impossible second. A champagne glass slipped from the tray. Crystal shattered violently across the marble dance floor beneath the chandeliers. Silence spread instantly through the ballroom. Conversation stopped. Violin music stumbled awkwardly before fading completely. Emily froze with the silver tray still trembling slightly in her hands while hundreds of wealthy guests slowly turned toward the sound. Broken glass glittered across the white dance floor directly beside Nathaniel Brooks and Victoria Hale. A pale stain of champagne spread across the edge of Victoria's expensive wedding gown. Olivia Grant covered her mouth in horror near the catering station. Emily immediately lowered the tray and stepped forward carefully. I am so sorry. Her voice stayed calm despite the sudden weight of every eye in the ballroom landing directly on her. Nathaniel looked down at the shattered crystal beside his polished shoes, then slowly up at Emily. The warmth vanished from his expression almost instantly. Seriously? He said sharply enough for nearby guests to hear. Emily reached for a linen cloth from the service cart nearby. It was an accident. Nathaniel laughed once beneath his breath. Cold. Public. That seems to happen a lot when people want attention at weddings. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances immediately. Victoria touched Nathaniel's arm lightly. Nathaniel. But he kept staring at Emily instead. Do you have any idea what this gown costs? Emily knelt carefully beside the broken glass and began cleaning the champagne from the marble floor with steady hands. I said I am sorry. Nathaniel stepped closer beneath the ballroom lights. Sorry does not remove stains. The silence around them became painful now. Emily could feel photographers lowering cameras awkwardly while wealthy guests pretended not to stare openly. But nobody interrupted him. Nobody ever interrupted powerful men during moments like this. Olivia hurried forward pale with panic. Mr. Brooks, we deeply apologize. Emily is one of our best employees. We will replace everything immediately. Nathaniel loosened the cuff of his tuxedo slightly while looking down at Emily, still kneeling quietly beside the shattered glass. Maybe hire employees who understand professionalism next time. Emily paused only briefly before continuing to collect the crystal pieces into a silver tray. No argument. No tears. Somehow her silence irritated Nathaniel more than defensiveness would have. "Look at me when I am speaking to you," he said coldly. The ballroom became completely still after that. Emily slowly lifted her eyes toward him beneath the warm chandelier light. Calm blue eyes. Steady. Unafraid. "You already have everyone else looking at you tonight," she said softly. "I did not realize you needed me to as well." A sharp silence hit the ballroom immediately. Several guests looked down into their champagne glasses, pretending not to hear the exchange. Nathaniel's expression hardened faintly. Victoria shifted awkwardly beside him, while cameras quietly disappeared from photographers' hands. Emily stood slowly holding the tray, filled with shattered crystal. "Again," she said quietly, "I am sorry about the dress." Then she turned and walked calmly toward the service hallway beneath hundreds of stunned eyes following her across the ballroom. Behind her, violin music slowly resumed as guests forced conversations back to life again. But something inside the wedding atmosphere had already cracked beneath the surface. Nathaniel remained standing near the dance floor watching Emily disappear behind the ballroom doors. Irritation still burned beneath his expression, but another feeling slipped quietly underneath it now. Unease. Because the waitress he publicly embarrassed did not react the way people usually reacted to him. No begging. No fear. No performance. Just dignity. And somehow that felt more unsettling than the broken champagne glass still glittering beneath the chandeliers. Back inside the service hallway, Emily finally exhaled softly once nobody could see her face clearly anymore. Olivia rushed toward her immediately. "Emily, are you okay?" Emily set the silver tray carefully onto the counter. "I broke a glass at a billionaire wedding. The world survived." Olivia lowered her voice. "Nathaniel Brooks can ruin careers with one phone call." Emily reached for another tray calmly. "Then hopefully he stays too busy enjoying his wedding." Before Olivia could answer, movement near the ballroom entrance caught Emily's attention. An elderly woman sat alone near the far corner of the reception beside the windows overlooking snowy Manhattan. Margaret Brooks, Nathaniel's grandmother. While the ballroom celebrated around her, she looked strangely distant from everything happening tonight. Then slowly, almost secretly, Margaret lifted her eyes toward Emily across the room. And with trembling hands, the elderly woman pressed a thick cream-colored envelope tightly against her lap, like she was terrified someone else might see it. The wedding reception never fully recovered after the shattered champagne glass. Even an hour later, while violin music floated beneath the crystal chandeliers and wealthy guests forced polite smiles back onto their faces, an uncomfortable tension still lingered quietly inside the ballroom. Nathaniel Brooks stood near the stage speaking with investors and politicians beneath warm golden lighting, but every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the service hall where Emily Carter disappeared after the humiliation near the dance floor. He hated that he noticed her absence at all. Usually people embarrassed in public reacted predictably around him. Tears. Apologies. Nervous attempts to regain approval. Emily Carter simply returned to work like his opinion carried no weight inside her world. Somehow that unsettled him more than defiance would have. "You were harsh," Victoria Hale said softly while adjusting the diamond bracelet around her wrist. Nathaniel took a sip of whiskey without looking away from the ballroom crowd. "She dropped champagne on your wedding dress." Victoria lowered her voice slightly. She looked terrified. Nathaniel almost laughed beneath his breath. No, his gray eyes shifted briefly toward the service hallway again. That was the strange part. Across the ballroom, Emily balanced fresh champagne flutes on a silver trays while Olivia Grant nervously reorganized catering staff schedules beside her. "Please avoid the VIP tables for the rest of the evening," Olivia whispered carefully. Emily nodded once. "That sounds peaceful, actually." Olivia hesitated briefly before lowering her voice further. "Nathaniel Brooks is not usually like this in public." Emily adjusted the tray against her palm calmly. "People with power rarely notice how they sound when humiliating someone." Olivia looked down awkwardly without answering. Before either woman could continue speaking, movement near the ballroom windows caught Emily's attention again. Margaret Brooks still sat alone in the far corner beneath soft amber lighting while wedding guests laughed and danced nearby, pretending the evening remained perfect. The elderly woman looked increasingly pale now. One trembling hand pressed tightly against the cream-colored envelope resting in her lap. Then slowly, Margaret lifted her eyes toward Emily once more. This time there was unmistakable urgency in them. Emily glanced toward Olivia. "Can you cover table 12 for a minute?" Olivia frowned slightly. "Where are you going?" Emily looked toward the elderly woman near the windows. "Someone looks like they need help." Emily crossed the ballroom quietly beneath the glow of chandeliers and drifting violin music, while wealthy guests barely noticed the waitress moving between their conversations. Margaret Brooks watched her approach with visible relief, softening the tension in her face. "Miss Carter," the older woman said weakly once Emily reached the table. Emily knelt slightly beside her chair. "Are you all right?" Margaret's hand trembled against the envelope. "Not exactly." Emily immediately noticed how cold the woman's fingers looked beneath the ballroom lights. "Should I call someone?" Margaret glanced quickly toward the dance floor where Nathaniel posed for another photograph beside Victoria and several investors. "No," her voice lowered carefully. "Not yet." Emily frowned slightly. "You do not look well." Margaret gave a faint, tired smile. Old age and wealthy families are both exhausting things. Despite the situation, Emily almost smiled softly at that. Margaret slowly pressed the cream-colored envelope into Emily's hands beneath the table where nobody nearby could easily notice. Emily blinked in surprise. "What is this?" Margaret's expression turned serious immediately. "Something Nathaniel needs to see before midnight." Emily looked down at the envelope carefully. Thick, heavy, sealed with an old-fashioned wax stamp. "Then why not give it to him yourself?" For several seconds, Margaret said nothing while violin music echoed gently through the ballroom around them. Then her tired blue eyes lifted toward Nathaniel standing beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by cameras and smiling guests. Because he stopped listening to this family a long time ago. Emily studied the older woman carefully. Beneath the expensive jewelry and elegant gown, Margaret Brooks looked frightened. Not physically, emotionally, like someone watching disaster approach slowly while nobody else noticed. "What is inside?" Emily asked softly. Margaret's fingers tightened weakly around Emily's wrist. "Truth." The word barely rose above a whisper. Emily glanced toward the envelope again. "About what?" Margaret opened her mouth to answer. Then suddenly her expression changed. One hand moved sharply toward the edge of the table while her breathing became uneven. Emily reacted instantly. "Mrs. Brooks." The elderly woman's champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers and rolled across the white tablecloth before falling silently onto the carpet. Nearby guests turned immediately as Margaret leaned sideways in her chair, struggling to remain upright. Emily caught her before she slipped further. "Someone call medical staff," Emily said firmly while supporting Margaret's shoulders. The ballroom atmosphere shifted instantly into nervous confusion. Guests stepped closer. Violin music stopped abruptly. Nathaniel turned sharply from the dance floor the moment he heard his grandmother's name. "Grandmother?" Emily kept one arm carefully around Margaret while loosening the older woman's scarf slightly. "She needs air." Nathaniel hurried toward them immediately alongside Victoria and several family members. Cameras flashed instinctively before security forced photographers backward. "What happened?" Nathaniel demanded sharply. Emily looked up calmly. "I think she became overwhelmed." Nathaniel knelt beside his grandmother while concern finally cracked through his polished composure. "Grandmother, can you hear me?" Margaret opened her eyes weakly beneath the ballroom lights. Her gaze moved past Nathaniel directly toward Emily. Then, with visible effort, the older woman whispered softly enough that only Emily heard the words clearly. "Do not let him marry her before he sees the envelope." Emily froze instantly. Nathaniel looked up sharply. "What did she say?" Before Emily could answer, Margaret's eyes closed again from exhaustion while ballroom staff hurried forward carrying water and medical equipment. Nathaniel immediately stood and turned toward Emily. "What envelope?" The entire ballroom seemed to quiet around them again. Emily still held the cream-colored envelope tightly against her black waitress uniform beneath hundreds of curious eyes and flashing camera lights. For one strange second, Nathaniel Brooks stared at her not with irritation this time, with suspicion, and somewhere beneath the chandeliers and wedding roses and expensive smiles, Emily suddenly realized this wedding was hiding something far more dangerous than broken champagne glasses. The ballroom atmosphere changed after Margaret Brooks nearly collapsed. Wealthy guests still held champagne glasses beneath the chandeliers. Violin music eventually returned in cautious soft notes. Cameras resumed flashing near the dance floor. Yet beneath the polished surface of the wedding reception, something colder now moved quietly through the room. Suspicion. Nathaniel Brooks stood beside his grandmother's chair watching medical staff check her pulse, while his attention remained locked on the cream-colored envelope still clutched tightly in Emily Carter's hands. Victoria Hale noticed it too. "What exactly did she give you?" Victoria asked carefully, her elegant smile tightening at the edges. Emily glanced down briefly at the envelope. Mrs. Brooks wanted Nathaniel to see it. Nathaniel stepped closer immediately. "Then give it to me." Emily hesitated. Not because she wanted power over the moment, because Margaret's trembling voice still echoed inside her head. "Do not let him marry her before he sees the envelope." Something about the fear behind those words unsettled her deeply. Nathaniel noticed the hesitation instantly. "What is wrong with you people tonight?" His voice lowered sharply. First the scene with the champagne. Now this. Emily looked directly at him beneath the warm ballroom lights. Your grandmother looked frightened. Victoria folded her arms lightly beside him. Margaret has been emotional for weeks. Weddings overwhelm older people sometimes. But Emily noticed something strange then. Victoria never looked at Margaret while speaking, only at the envelope. Nathaniel extended one hand impatiently. "Give it to me now." Before Emily could respond, Margaret slowly opened her eyes again beneath the ballroom lights. "Not here," she whispered weakly. Nathaniel immediately leaned closer. "Grandmother, what is inside the envelope?" Margaret's tired blue eyes shifted briefly toward Victoria, standing beside him. Then back to Nathaniel. "Private." Victoria's expression changed almost imperceptibly for 1 second. Tiny, but enough for Emily to notice. Fear. Real fear. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said softly while forcing another graceful smile toward nearby guests pretending not to listen openly. "Nathaniel, the reception is falling apart." Nathaniel remained focused on the envelope instead. "Everyone give us a minute." Within moments, Olivia Grant quietly guided nearby guests back toward the dance floor, while medical staff helped Margaret rest more comfortably in her chair. The ballroom slowly pretended normalcy again beneath the chandeliers, but whispers drifted everywhere now like smoke beneath the music. Emily followed Nathaniel toward a smaller private lounge connected to the ballroom overlooking snowy Manhattan through tall glass windows. Victoria moved immediately to follow them. Margaret's weak voice stopped her. "Not you." The room fell silent again. Victoria turned slowly. "Excuse me." Margaret looked directly at her for the first time all evening. "Nathaniel needs to read it alone." Victoria's elegant composure nearly cracked before she recovered. "Of course." But Emily noticed the tension in her jaw immediately. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "Victoria, it is fine." "No," Margaret interrupted quietly. "Please." Something inside the older woman's tone made Nathaniel finally nod reluctantly. "Stay with the guests. I will be back in 5 minutes." Victoria forced a polished smile. "All right." Yet as Nathaniel and Emily walked toward the private lounge together, Emily felt Victoria's eyes following the envelope with unmistakable panic. Inside the private room, the sounds of the ballroom softened behind thick wooden doors. Snow drifted slowly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows while the city lights of Manhattan shimmered below in cold silver reflections. Nathaniel loosened the cuff of his tuxedo sharply. "Open it." Emily carefully handed him the envelope. Nathaniel broke the old wax seal immediately and removed several folded documents along with an aged black-and-white photograph. His expression shifted almost instantly. "What is this?" Emily stepped slightly closer. The photograph showed a much younger Margaret Brooks standing beside Nathaniel's late grandfather in front of the original Brooks International headquarters nearly 40 years earlier. But another figure stood partially visible in the corner of the image. Victoria's father. Nathaniel frowned deeply while unfolding the remaining papers. Legal documents. Financial transfer agreements. Partnership revisions. Emily watched confusion slowly harden across his face. "These are company ownership records," Nathaniel murmured quietly. Then his eyes stopped moving. Silence filled the room. Emily noticed the exact second his expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "What?" she asked softly. Nathaniel looked up slowly. Victoria's father purchased controlling interest shares in Brooks International 6 months ago through offshore accounts. Emily blinked. That is possible. Nathaniel gave a bitter laugh beneath his breath. Only if someone inside the family approved it. Snow pressed softly against the windows while Nathaniel rapidly turned through the remaining pages. Hidden merger clauses. Trust amendments. Transfer authorizations scheduled to activate automatically after the wedding ceremony finalized tomorrow afternoon. No, he whispered quietly. Emily watched him carefully. What is it? Nathaniel looked down at one final signed document near the bottom of the stack. His own signature stared back at him. Victoria convinced him months earlier to approve temporary restructuring agreements during wedding planning and international expansion meetings. He signed without reading closely. Because he trusted her. The marriage transfers voting control, Nathaniel said slowly. Once the ceremony is complete, Brooks International effectively belongs to her investment group. The words settled heavily inside the room. Emily felt cold suddenly despite the warm lighting surrounding them. Nathaniel lowered himself slowly into one of the leather chairs beside the windows while staring blankly at the documents spread across the table. For the first time all evening, the billionaire CEO no longer looked powerful, just blindsided. Why would your grandmother give this to me? Emily asked quietly. Nathaniel laughed softly without humor. Because she knew I would never listen to her. He rubbed one hand across his face exhaustedly. And apparently, I was too busy humiliating waitresses to notice my own wedding becoming a corporate takeover. Emily said nothing after that. Outside the ballroom doors, violin music continued drifting through the reception, while guests toasted love and wealth beneath golden chandeliers, completely unaware that the perfect wedding already carried the quiet beginning of betrayal inside it. Then suddenly the private lounge door opened sharply. Victoria stood there breathing unevenly, her elegant white gown glowing beneath the warm hallway light. Her eyes moved instantly toward the documents spread across the table. And for the first time since Emily met her tonight, Victoria Hale stopped pretending to smile. Victoria Hale stood motionless in the doorway of the private lounge, while warm ballroom light spilled across the polished wooden floor behind her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Snow drifted softly beyond the tall windows overlooking Manhattan, while violin music continued faintly outside the room, as if the wedding itself still believed everything remained beautiful. Nathaniel Brooks slowly rose from the leather chair, holding the financial documents in one hand. His face looked colder now, sharper somehow. Victoria's eyes moved immediately toward the papers spread across the table beside Emily Carter. Nathaniel, she said carefully, you should not be reading private financial records during our wedding reception. Nathaniel laughed softly beneath his breath. Not with humor. Our wedding reception? He lifted one of the signed agreements slightly. Or your acquisition celebration? Victoria stepped farther into the room, elegance still perfectly arranged across her white gown despite the tension tightening her expression. You are overreacting. Emily remained quietly near the windows watching the exchange without interruption. She noticed something strange immediately. Victoria never once looked surprised by the documents. Only concerned Nathaniel had finally seen them. My grandmother almost collapsed trying to get these to me, Nathaniel said quietly. You want to explain why? Victoria exhaled slowly as if gathering patience for an exhausting conversation. Because your grandmother has never trusted anyone outside the Brooks family. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. These agreements transfer company control after the ceremony. Victoria crossed her arms lightly. Temporary restructuring. You signed them months ago. Without realizing your father controlled the investment group hidden behind them. Silence settled heavily inside the room. Victoria's polished calm cracked slightly then. That was strategic protection for the company. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief. You manipulated me into signing away controlling interest during wedding planning. Victoria's voice sharpened immediately. I protected your company from collapsing under outdated leadership. Emily noticed the exact moment Nathaniel stopped looking hurt and started looking betrayed. It changed the entire room. So this was never about marriage, he said quietly. Victoria looked directly at him beneath the warm lounge lights. Everything is about survival, Nathaniel. You taught me that. Outside the ballroom doors, guests laughed softly over champagne beneath chandeliers, completely unaware that the bride and groom were quietly dismantling each other inside a private room overlooking snowy Manhattan. Emily slowly stepped backward toward the door. I should leave. Nathaniel immediately looked toward her. No, Victoria's attention snapped sharply toward Emily then. Actually, I think you should. Her tone remained smooth but colder now. This situation has nothing to do with a waitress. Emily met her eyes calmly. Your future husband disagrees. Victoria walked closer slowly, the white silk of her wedding gown gliding across the floor beneath the soft lighting. You have already caused enough disruption tonight. Emily almost smiled faintly at the irony. I dropped one champagne glass. Victoria lowered her voice carefully. And suddenly you are standing in the middle of family business that does not concern you. Nathaniel interrupted sharply. Enough. The room fell silent again. Nathaniel looked exhausted now. Not angry in the explosive way powerful men often became. Worse, disappointed. Did you ever plan on telling me? He asked Victoria quietly. She looked away toward the snowy skyline beyond the windows before answering. Eventually, Nathaniel laughed once beneath his breath again. That sounds romantic. Victoria's composure hardened. You built Brooks International by treating every relationship like a negotiation. Do not act shocked someone finally negotiated back. The sentence landed painfully because it carried truth inside it. Emily noticed Nathaniel absorb that immediately. Somewhere beneath the billionaire arrogance and polished control, he understood exactly why this betrayal found him so vulnerable tonight. Because part of him created the environment where trust became secondary to power. Victoria softened her voice slightly after a long silence. Nathaniel, listen to me carefully. She stepped closer. The company needs modernization. Your grandmother still believes Brooks International belongs in the 1980s. Your board fears risk. Your investors fear innovation. Nathaniel held the documents tightly in one hand. So you decided to steal control through marriage? I decided to save what you were too emotionally attached to protect. Emily quietly watched the tension moving between them beneath the ballroom lights reflecting through the glass doors. Wealthy people always spoke about love strangely when money entered the room. Like affection and ownership slowly became interchangeable. Nathaniel looked toward Emily suddenly. Did you know all this already? Emily blinked slightly. No, then why stay involved? The question carried genuine confusion now instead of accusation. Emily glanced down briefly at the envelope still resting on the table between them. Because your grandmother looked terrified. Nathaniel stared at her silently. Emily lifted her calm blue eyes toward him beneath the warm lighting. And because nobody else in this ballroom seemed interested in listening to her. Silence followed immediately after that. Outside, the violinists began another slow song, while waiters carried champagne beneath glowing chandeliers and photographers continued capturing images of a perfect wedding already quietly collapsing behind closed doors. Victoria folded her arms tighter around herself. Nathaniel, if this becomes public tonight, the company's stock will collapse by morning. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. You are still thinking about stock prices. Victoria's expression turned unexpectedly sad for one brief second. Someone has to. That line stayed suspended inside the room while snow drifted beyond the windows in soft white silence. Then suddenly, soft knocking interrupted the tension at the door. Olivia Grant stepped carefully inside looking pale. Mr. Brooks, she said nervously. The guests are asking when the first dance begins. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly as if the question itself exhausted him. Olivia's gaze moved uncertainly between the bride, the waitress, and the scattered legal documents across the table. Should I delay the schedule? Nathaniel slowly opened his eyes again. For the first time all evening, he no longer looked like a billionaire CEO controlling the room. He looked like a man realizing his entire wedding might have been built on performance instead of trust. Then quietly, almost to himself, Nathaniel asked the question nobody else in the ballroom was prepared to hear tonight. What happens, he said softly, when the only honest person at your wedding is the waitress you humiliated? The ballroom lights looked warmer after midnight, but the wedding itself felt colder now. Guests still danced beneath the crystal chandeliers while champagne continued flowing across silver trays carried through crowded tables. From a distance, everything still resembled a luxury Manhattan celebration designed for magazine covers. But whispers moved quietly through the room now. Wealthy people sensed tension faster than ordinary people because they spent entire lives hiding it beneath expensive smiles. Nathaniel Brooks stood alone near the private lounge windows overlooking snowy Fifth Avenue, while the financial documents remained spread across the polished table behind him. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hale gracefully greeted investors and family friends as if nothing unusual happened at all. Emily Carter watched the entire room carefully from the catering station while balancing fresh champagne flutes onto silver trays beside Olivia Grant. "This wedding feels cursed now," Olivia whispered nervously. Emily glanced toward the dance floor, where photographers continued capturing smiling images of the bride beneath glowing chandeliers. "No," Emily said quietly. "Just dishonest." Olivia lowered her voice immediately. "Do you think the wedding will actually continue tomorrow?" Emily looked toward Nathaniel, standing alone near the windows. "I think he does not know yet." Across the ballroom, Margaret Brooks finally seemed stronger after resting beside the fireplace lounge near the orchestra stage. Several family members surrounded her now, but Emily noticed the older woman's attention repeatedly drifting toward Nathaniel with visible worry. Like someone watching a storm approach slowly while nobody else understood the damage coming with it. Then suddenly Nathaniel crossed the ballroom directly toward Emily. Conversations subtly quieted nearby as wealthy guests noticed the billionaire approaching the waitress he humiliated earlier tonight. Emily remained still while Nathaniel stopped beside the catering station beneath soft golden lighting. "Walk with me," he said quietly. Olivia immediately disappeared toward the kitchen, pretending not to notice the tension surrounding them. Emily followed Nathaniel through a side hallway leading toward the hotel terrace overlooking snowy Manhattan. Cold winter air swept gently around them once the terrace doors opened. Below them, New York glowed silver and gold beneath falling snow, while distant traffic moved slowly through the midnight streets. Nathaniel rested both hands against the stone railing silently for several seconds before speaking. "You should not still be helping me." Emily folded her black winter coat tighter around herself against the cold. "Your grandmother asked me to." Nathaniel laughed softly beneath his breath. "Most people in this city would have sold those documents to reporters within 10 minutes. Emily looked out toward the skyline. "Most people are exhausted." Nathaniel glanced toward her carefully. "What does that mean?" Emily hesitated briefly. "It means people spend so much time trying to survive that eventually they stop protecting what is right." Snow landed softly against the shoulders of her dark uniform, while Manhattan lights reflected faintly in her calm blue eyes. Nathaniel studied her quietly. "You really are different from everyone in my world." Emily almost smiled faintly. "That is because your world mistakes performance for character." The sentence settled heavily between them while cold wind drifted across the terrace. Nathaniel loosened his tie slightly. "Victoria says she was trying to save the company." Emily looked toward him. "Do you believe her?" Nathaniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared down at the traffic moving below the hotel far beneath them. "I built Brooks International believing trust made people weak." His voice sounded distant now. "Every negotiation, every partnership, every acquisition." He laughed quietly without humor. "Maybe this is just the first time someone finally used my own rules against me." Emily watched him carefully. For the first time tonight, Nathaniel Brooks no longer sounded arrogant. He sounded tired. Deeply tired. "Your grandmother still tried protecting you," Emily said softly. Nathaniel nodded once. "She always believed family mattered more than power." Snow continued falling around them in slow silence, while music drifted faintly through the terrace doors behind them. Then Nathaniel looked toward Emily again. "Why are you working as a waitress?" Emily blinked slightly at the sudden question. "Because restaurants pay every Friday." That is not the full answer. Emily looked away toward the city lights. "Some stories are expensive to finish." Nathaniel noticed the sadness hidden carefully inside her voice, but did not push further. Somehow tonight already carried enough exposed truths between strangers. Inside the ballroom behind them, applause suddenly erupted as the orchestra announced the upcoming rehearsal of the bride and groom's first dance for tomorrow's ceremony. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly at the sound. "I cannot believe they are still pretending everything is normal." Emily looked toward the ballroom doors. "That is what rich people do best." Before Nathaniel could answer, the terrace doors opened sharply behind them. Victoria stepped outside into the snow, wearing her white silk gown beneath a fur-lined shawl. Her expression looked calm again. Too calm. "The board members are asking for you," she told Nathaniel softly. Nathaniel turned slowly toward her. "At midnight." Victoria stepped closer through the falling snow. They flew across the country for this wedding. Her eyes briefly shifted toward Emily standing beside the railing. And people are beginning to talk. Emily immediately understood what Victoria truly meant. The waitress standing beside the billionaire groom beneath snowy Manhattan skies looked dangerous to public image now. Nathaniel noticed it too. Emily stays, he said calmly. Victoria's elegant smile tightened slightly. You trust her more than your fiancé now? Nathaniel looked directly at Victoria beneath the cold winter lights. Tonight? Yes. Silence hit instantly. Snow drifted softly around the terrace while distant traffic echoed below the hotel. Victoria's expression froze for one brief second before recovering into another polished smile. Then perhaps your grandmother succeeded. Nathaniel frowned slightly. What does that mean? Victoria stepped closer beneath the falling snow. Margaret never wanted this wedding. Emily felt the tension sharpen immediately between them. Victoria lowered her voice carefully. Your grandmother believes preserving the Brooks family legacy matters more than your happiness. Nathaniel stared at her silently. Victoria's eyes softened unexpectedly. Nathaniel, I did love you. The sentence sounded painfully honest, which somehow made everything worse. Nathaniel looked down briefly toward the snowy city below them before answering quietly. But not enough to tell me the truth. Victoria said nothing after that. The orchestra music drifted softly through the terrace doors while snow continued covering Manhattan in white silence. Then slowly, Victoria removed the engagement ring from her finger beneath the winter lights. No drama, no tears. She simply placed the diamond carefully onto the stone railing between them. And suddenly the entire wedding began, ending not with shouting or chaos, but with one small sound almost nobody inside the ballroom would hear. The soft click of a ring touching cold stone. The diamond ring remained on the frozen stone railing long after Victoria Hale walked back inside the ballroom alone. Snow continued falling softly across the Manhattan skyline, while the distant sound of orchestra music drifted through the terrace doors behind Nathaniel Brooks and Emily Carter. Neither of them moved for several seconds. The ring looked strangely small beneath the winter lights. Months of wedding planning, magazine interviews, luxury invitations, family expectations, billion-dollar mergers hidden behind romance. Somehow all of it ended with silence and snowfall instead of vows. Nathaniel finally picked up the engagement ring slowly between two fingers. I thought tonight would be simple, he said quietly. Emily folded her arms against the cold wind. Rich people always think expensive things will feel simple. Nathaniel almost smiled faintly at that. Almost. But exhaustion kept pulling the expression away before it fully formed. You really do not care who I am, do you? Emily looked out across the city below them. I care how people treat others when they believe nobody important is watching. The sentence settled gently between them while snow touched the shoulders of her black waitress uniform. Nathaniel lowered his eyes toward the ring resting in his palm. And what exactly have you decided about me tonight? Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. I think you spent most of your life confusing control with strength. Nathaniel laughed softly beneath his breath. That sounds expensive to unpack in therapy. Despite herself, Emily smiled slightly for the first time all evening. Warm, brief, real. Nathaniel noticed immediately. And strangely, that small smile felt more valuable than every polished expression surrounding his wedding reception inside the ballroom. Before either of them could speak again, the terrace doors opened suddenly. Olivia Grant stepped outside looking pale beneath the hotel lighting. Mr. Brooks, she said nervously, your board members are asking questions now. Nathaniel slipped the engagement ring quietly into his pocket. About what? Olivia glanced toward the ballroom uneasily. Victoria left the reception floor without security. Investors noticed. The press photographers noticed too. Emily immediately understood the danger. Wealthy families survived scandals through silence and timing. But tonight, silence was already collapsing. Nathaniel exhaled slowly while snow drifted across the terrace around them. I need 10 more minutes. Olivia nodded uncertainly before disappearing back inside. Emily turned toward the ballroom doors. You should go. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. You say that like you are leaving. Emily adjusted the sleeves of her coat calmly. My shift ends in 20 minutes. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief. After everything that happened tonight, you are worried about clocking out? Emily tilted her head slightly. Some people do not have billion-dollar companies waiting for them tomorrow morning. Nathaniel fell silent after that. Because beneath the sarcasm, she was right. Emily Carter still had rent, bills, ordinary responsibilities waiting outside this luxury hotel, while his world exploded beneath chandeliers and financial betrayal. Yet somehow she remained calmer than anyone else tonight. They walked back inside together through the terrace doors into the warm glow of the ballroom. The atmosphere shifted immediately once guests noticed Nathaniel returning without Victoria beside him. Conversations softened. Musicians kept playing, but even the orchestra sounded uncertain now. Margaret Brooks watched her grandson carefully from the fireplace lounge, while relief slowly softened her tired face after seeing Emily beside him. Nathaniel crossed the ballroom directly toward his grandmother. Emily quietly moved back toward the catering station, hoping to disappear into work again. But halfway across the room, Nathaniel's voice stopped her. "Emily." The entire ballroom seemed to pause subtly after that. Waiters slowed. Investors glanced sideways over champagne glasses. Even Olivia froze beside the seating charts. Nathaniel approached Emily beneath the chandeliers while hundreds of wealthy guests quietly watched the billionaire CEO. Speaking to the waitress he humiliated only hours earlier. "I owe you an apology," he said calmly. Real silence spread now. Emily looked genuinely surprised. Nathaniel continued before fear or pride could stop him. "I embarrassed you publicly tonight because I assumed your position determined your value." Several guests lowered their eyes awkwardly nearby. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. "I was wrong." Emily glanced around the ballroom, filled with shocked faces and expensive silence. "You do not owe me a public speech." Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "Actually, I think I do." Somewhere near the orchestra stage, one champagne glass quietly touched another while guests pretended not to openly stare at the moment unfolding beneath the chandeliers. Emily studied Nathaniel carefully. His apology carried no performance now. No arrogance hidden beneath it. Just honesty stripped painfully clean. "Accepted," she said softly. Nathaniel looked relieved for the first time all evening. But before the moment could settle peacefully, raised voices suddenly echoed near the ballroom entrance. Victoria Hale stood beside several furious investors while hotel security attempted calming the growing tension near the doors. One older board member held copies of financial documents in trembling hands. Emily's stomach tightened immediately. The papers spread faster than anyone expected. Wealthy people protected secrets carefully until money became threatened. Then loyalty disappeared instantly. "Nathaniel," one investor shouted sharply across the ballroom. "Are these merger clauses legitimate?" Conversations erupted everywhere at once now. The orchestra stopped completely. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered urgently beneath the chandeliers while security attempted controlling the chaos spreading through the reception hall. Nathaniel looked toward the ballroom entrance where Victoria stood frozen beneath dozens of staring faces. For one brief second, she looked less like a manipulative socialite and more like someone realizing the perfect future she built had collapsed publicly beyond repair. Margaret Brooks slowly rose from her chair near the fireplace despite protests from family members around her. The elderly woman crossed the ballroom carefully until she reached Emily beside Nathaniel beneath the golden lights. Then softly, almost emotionally, Margaret took Emily's hand in front of everyone watching. "Thank you," she whispered. The ballroom fell strangely quiet after that, because suddenly the most powerful family in the room was standing beside the waitress instead of above her. And beneath the crystal chandeliers of a wedding built entirely on appearances, the truth finally stopped hiding. The ballroom no longer sounded like a wedding reception after the financial documents spread through the crowd. The music stopped completely now. Champagne glasses rested untouched across white linen tables while investors, reporters, and wealthy guests whispered beneath the crystal chandeliers with the sharp, nervous energy of people realizing they accidentally walked into a scandal instead of a celebration. Snow continued falling beyond the towering windows of the Ashford Grand Hotel, while Manhattan glittered cold and distant beneath the winter sky outside. At the center of the ballroom stood Nathaniel Brooks beside Emily Carter and Margaret Brooks, while conversations collapsed around them in uneasy waves. Victoria Hale remained near the ballroom entrance, surrounded by furious board members clutching copied financial agreements beneath the bright camera flashes already beginning to spread through the room. Emily quietly pulled her hand away from Margaret's trembling fingers and stepped slightly backward. She hated becoming visible inside rooms like this. But invisibility was impossible now. Nathaniel, one older investor, demanded sharply while pushing through the crowd. Is Brooks International actually facing a hostile transfer agreement? Nathaniel's jaw tightened beneath the golden chandelier light. Before he could answer, Victoria stepped forward calmly. This situation is being exaggerated. Her voice remained smooth, controlled, elegant. The restructuring plans were legal and designed to protect company expansion internationally. Without informing your fiancé, another board member snapped. Victoria's polished expression flickered for only half a second before returning. Nathaniel signed the agreements himself. The ballroom grew even quieter after that. Wealthy people understood betrayal best when signatures became involved. Nathaniel stared at Victoria across the ballroom floor where hours earlier they planned their first dance together. You built an entire marriage around paperwork, he said quietly. Victoria looked directly at him beneath the lights. No. Her voice softened unexpectedly. I built it around survival. Emily watched the exchange silently, while waiters stood frozen beside catering stations, unsure whether to continue serving drinks or disappear completely. Olivia Grant looked moments away from resigning publicly. Nearby photographers adjusted lenses, carefully sensing career-defining headlines unfolding in real time. Margaret Brooks suddenly stepped forward beside her grandson, despite visible weakness still lingering in her posture. Enough, the elderly woman said quietly. Yet somehow the ballroom obeyed immediately. Silence spread beneath the chandeliers while snow drifted outside the windows in slow white patterns. Margaret looked toward Victoria with tired sadness instead of anger. Your father spent 30 years waiting to take this company from our family. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly. Because your family destroyed his. Several guests exchanged startled glances. Nathaniel frowned deeply. What are you talking about? Margaret exhaled slowly before answering. Long before you were born, Brooks International forced Victoria's father out during the company merger crisis. Nathaniel stared at his grandmother in disbelief. You never told me that. Margaret's tired expression darkened. Some truths embarrass powerful families. Victoria folded her arms tightly around herself beneath the ballroom lights. My father lost everything while your family kept building skyscrapers. Nathaniel looked down briefly at the scattered legal documents resting across the nearby table. So this was revenge. Victoria's voice cracked for the first time all evening. No, she stepped closer. At first it was survival. Then somewhere along the way, her eyes softened painfully toward him. I actually fell in love with you. The sentence hung heavily inside the ballroom. Real, honest, tragic. Emily felt it immediately, because the worst betrayals were rarely built entirely from lies. Nathaniel looked exhausted now, standing beneath the chandeliers where photographers once planned glamorous wedding portraits. You should have trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Victoria smiled sadly. People like us do not survive by trusting billionaires. Emily quietly lowered her eyes after hearing that. Somewhere beneath all the manipulation and hidden agreements, she understood what Victoria truly meant. Wealth distorted people slowly until love itself started sounding like negotiation. Suddenly, one younger investor pointed sharply toward Emily near the ballroom center. How did the waitress get involved in all this? Several guests immediately turned toward her again. Emily visibly stiffened beneath the attention. Nathaniel noticed instantly. Leave her out of this. But the questions already spread through the room. Did she leak the documents? Was she working for someone? How much did they pay her? Emily felt the familiar humiliation rising again beneath the stares of wealthy strangers who automatically assumed ordinary people must be manipulating something whenever truth entered expensive rooms. Nathaniel stepped directly beside her before anyone else could continue. She protected this family tonight when nobody else did. Silence followed immediately. Nathaniel's voice remained calm, but firm now. The only reason any of us know the truth before tomorrow's ceremony is because Emily Carter listened when the rest of us ignored my grandmother. Emily glanced toward him surprised. Nathaniel looked around the ballroom filled with board members, investors, reporters, and luxury guests beneath the glowing chandeliers. Earlier tonight, I humiliated her publicly because I believed status-determined character. His eyes moved slowly across the crowd. I was wrong. No music played now. No silverware moved. Even the photographers stopped clicking cameras for one strange second, while the billionaire CEO openly defended the waitress he embarrassed hours earlier. Emily wished desperately for invisibility again, but Margaret Brooks squeezed her hand softly beside her. "Do not hide now," the elderly woman whispered gently. "People like them need reminders." Nathaniel turned toward Emily carefully. "You could have exposed all this to reporters immediately." Emily shrugged faintly. "Your grandmother asked for help, not headlines." A few guests lowered their eyes awkwardly after hearing that, because suddenly the waitress standing beneath the chandeliers carried more dignity than anyone else in the ballroom combined. Victoria watched Emily quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "You know the ironic part?" Emily looked toward her cautiously. Victoria gave a tired smile, filled with defeat. "You are probably the only honest person in this entire hotel tonight." Snow pressed softly against the ballroom windows while silence lingered around the shattered remains of what was supposed to become Manhattan's wedding of the year. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, Nathaniel looked at Emily differently for the first time since meeting her. Not as a waitress, not as an interruption, but as someone who carried the kind of integrity money spent entire lifetimes trying unsuccessfully to buy. The ballroom looked beautiful again from a distance. That was the strange thing about wealthy places. Even while collapsing emotionally, they still glowed beneath perfect lighting. Crystal chandeliers continued reflecting across marble floors. White roses still framed the stage where vows were supposed to happen tomorrow afternoon. Snow drifted beyond the tall Manhattan windows while orchestra musicians quietly packed instruments away one by one beneath the uneasy silence hanging across the reception hall. Yet nobody danced anymore. Guests stood in nervous clusters whispering over untouched champagne glasses, while reporters lingered near the exits hoping for statements powerful enough to become headlines by morning. At the center of it all stood Nathaniel Brooks beside Emily Carter and Margaret Brooks beneath the warm ballroom lights. The billionaire CEO who spent years controlling every room now looked strangely still, as if truth itself finally forced him to stop performing. Across the ballroom, Victoria Hale quietly removed the diamond earrings from her ears while several investors argued around her in hushed, angry voices. The elegant confidence she carried all evening had faded now, leaving behind simple exhaustion. Emily watched her carefully. Somewhere beneath the manipulation and hidden contracts, Victoria looked heartbreakingly human standing there alone beside the shattered remains of a wedding built on fear instead of trust. "Miss Carter." Emily turned slightly. One older female reporter approached carefully, holding a microphone lowered respectfully at her side. "Would you like to comment on what happened tonight?" Emily immediately shook her head. "No," the reporter looked surprised. "You do realize every major financial publication in New York is already covering this story?" Emily adjusted the sleeves of her black uniform calmly. "Then they probably already have enough people talking." Nathaniel noticed the exchange and stepped forward quietly beside her. "No interviews tonight." The reporter nodded respectfully and backed away without argument. Emily glanced toward Nathaniel once the woman disappeared into the crowd. "You did not need to do that." Nathaniel looked across the ballroom where guests continued whispering beneath the chandeliers. "I spent half the evening making your life harder." His voice softened slightly. "I can at least stop strangers from turning you into entertainment." Emily lowered her eyes briefly after that, because somehow the apology felt more sincere now in small moments than it did during the public speech earlier. Nearby, Margaret Brooks slowly sat beside the fireplace lounge looking exhausted but peaceful for the first time all evening. Nathaniel walked toward her, while Emily quietly returned to the catering station, hoping normal work might still exist somewhere inside this disaster. Olivia Grant immediately hurried toward her. "Are you secretly a lawyer or a detective or something?" Emily almost smiled faintly. "Tonight, I would settle for being invisible again." Olivia lowered her voice. "Half the ballroom thinks you saved Brooks International." Emily reached automatically for abandoned champagne glasses resting across a nearby table. "I carried an envelope across a room." Olivia watched her carefully. "Most people would not have." Emily paused briefly at that. Maybe Olivia was right. Maybe most people would have sold the documents or exposed the scandal publicly or used the moment to climb into a richer life. But Emily spent too many years watching ordinary people lose dignity, trying to survive difficult situations. Some things mattered more than advantage. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel knelt slightly beside his grandmother's chair, while snow reflected softly through the windows behind them. Margaret touched his face gently with trembling fingers. "I am sorry," she whispered. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "You protected me." Margaret's tired eyes filled with sadness. Too late. Nathaniel looked toward Emily quietly cleaning abandoned tables beneath the chandeliers. Not completely. Margaret followed his gaze across the ballroom. A soft, knowing smile touched her expression. "Careful," she murmured weakly. "The quiet women are always the ones who change powerful men forever." Nathaniel almost laughed beneath his breath. "You sound very confident about that." Margaret leaned back against the chair slowly. "Because powerful men spend their whole lives listening to people impressed by money." Her eyes remained on Emily. Then one honest woman arrives, and suddenly everything expensive starts sounding empty. Near the ballroom entrance, Victoria finally approached Nathaniel alone. The investors had disappeared toward private phone calls and emergency meetings upstairs. For the first time all evening, no photographers followed her. No spotlight remained. Just a woman standing quietly in the ruins of a future she tried desperately to control. "Nathaniel," she said softly. He looked toward her calmly. Victoria folded her hands together in front of her white gown. "The board lawyers will contact you by morning." Nathaniel nodded once. "I know." Silence settled briefly between them while snow continued falling outside. Victoria glanced toward Emily in the distance. "She really does not belong in rooms like this." Nathaniel looked toward Emily too. She stood beneath the chandeliers collecting broken pieces of crystal left from earlier in the evening, moving quietly while wealthy guests stepped around her without truly seeing her. "No," Nathaniel admitted softly. "I think maybe rooms like this do not deserve people like her." Victoria smiled sadly at that. "You changed quickly tonight." Nathaniel shook his head once. No, his eyes stayed on Emily. "I think I just finally stopped lying to myself." Victoria lowered her gaze after hearing that. Then slowly, gracefully, she removed the wedding bracelet from her wrist and placed it onto a nearby table beside untouched champagne glasses. "Goodbye, Nathaniel." "Goodbye, Victoria." No shouting. No dramatic ending. Just two exhausted people accepting the quiet death of something that probably never stood on stable ground to begin with. Victoria walked toward the ballroom exit alone beneath the crystal lights, while snow waited outside for her beyond the revolving hotel doors. Nathaniel remained standing silently near the center of the room long after she disappeared. Then finally, he crossed the ballroom toward Emily. She was kneeling beside the dance floor gathering the final pieces of shattered champagne glass from earlier that evening. The same glass that started everything. Nathaniel crouched beside her without speaking at first. Together they quietly placed crystal fragments into the silver tray while the empty ballroom slowly faded into silence around them. Then softly, almost humbled by the truth itself, Nathaniel said the words he should have understood hours ago. "You were the only person in this room trying to protect people instead of power." Emily placed the final piece of broken crystal into the tray before answering calmly. "That is because power usually survives." She looked up at him beneath the warm chandelier light. "People do not always get so lucky." By 2:30 in the morning, the Ashford Grand Hotel ballroom stood nearly empty beneath the fading chandelier lights. The orchestra was gone. Most of the guests disappeared into black luxury cars hours earlier, carrying whispered versions of the scandal back into Manhattan's winter night. Half-finished champagne glasses still rested across abandoned tables beside melting ice sculptures and wilted white roses that no longer looked romantic beneath the exhausted silence filling the room. Snow continued falling softly beyond the towering windows, while hotel staff quietly dismantled what remained of the wedding reception that never became a wedding at all. Emily Carter moved slowly across the empty dance floor, collecting linen napkins into a silver service cart, while warm golden light reflected softly against the polished marble beneath her feet. Her body ached from 14 straight hours of work and emotional chaos, but she still folded every cloth carefully, like the evening deserved dignity even after collapsing. Near the ballroom stage, Nathaniel Brooks stood alone, loosening the sleeves of his tuxedo while staring at the giant floral arrangement built around the dance floor. Hours earlier, photographers planned to capture his first dance there beneath violin music and crystal lights. Now only silence remained. He looked toward Emily, quietly working across the room. Strange how the waitress he barely noticed at the beginning of the night somehow became the only person whose presence still made the ballroom feel honest. Margaret Brooks had already been escorted upstairs to rest. Victoria Hale left through a private entrance surrounded by lawyers and advisors. The investors vanished into emergency meetings about Brooks International. Yet Emily remained. Not because she belonged in billionaire scandals. Because unfinished work still waited. Nathaniel slowly crossed the ballroom toward her while snow drifted against the windows behind him. Emily noticed him approaching but kept folding linens calmly into the cart. "You are still here," he said softly. Emily glanced toward the empty ballroom around them. Somebody has to clean up after rich people. Nathaniel almost smiled faintly beneath his exhaustion. That sounds like a philosophy, not a job description. Emily adjusted another folded napkin into the cart. Sometimes they become the same thing. Silence settled comfortably between them for the first time all evening. No reporters. No investors. No cameras waiting for statements. Just a billionaire and a waitress standing beneath fading chandelier lights, surrounded by the remains of a wedding destroyed by truth. Nathaniel looked toward the shattered champagne stain still faintly visible near the center of the dance floor despite multiple cleanings. "Funny." Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. "What?" Nathaniel nodded toward the floor. "Everything started with one broken glass." Emily followed his gaze. No, her voice stayed soft. "It started long before that. The glass just made people finally look." Nathaniel absorbed the sentence quietly. Because she was right again. Wealthy people spent years decorating broken things until they resembled success from a distance. Tonight simply stripped away the decorations. Emily lifted another stack of folded linens from the nearby table. Nathaniel watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You never told me why you work these kinds of jobs." Emily paused slightly. "Because life changes quickly." Nathaniel leaned lightly against one of the empty reception tables. "That sounds like experience talking." Emily looked out toward the snowy Manhattan skyline beyond the windows. "My father lost everything after trusting the wrong business partner when I was 19. Nathaniel listened silently. "We went from private schools and family vacations to diner jobs and overdue rent within 6 months. She folded another white linen cloth carefully between her hands. "After that, I stopped believing expensive people automatically understood loyalty." Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly after hearing that. "So when I humiliated you earlier tonight," Emily finished the sentence quietly. "It did not surprise me." The honesty in her answer hurt more than anger would have. Nathaniel slowly removed the expensive silver watch from his wrist and set it onto the abandoned table beside him like the weight of luxury itself suddenly exhausted him. "I became someone I would not have respected 10 years ago." Emily looked toward him calmly. "Most powerful people do." Nathaniel gave a tired laugh beneath his breath. "You always answer honestly, do not you?" Emily shrugged slightly. "Lying takes energy." Snow continued drifting outside, while ballroom workers quietly removed floral arrangements in the distance. One by one, the glowing chandeliers above them dimmed lower as hotel staff began shutting down the reception hall for the night. Nathaniel looked around the empty ballroom slowly. Tomorrow morning, every newspaper in New York will cover this disaster. Emily placed the final folded napkin into the silver cart. Then tomorrow morning Manhattan will survive another headline. Nathaniel studied her quietly beneath the fading golden lights. "You really are impossible to impress." Emily finally smiled softly again. "Real. Gentle. That is because I have seen too many people confuse expensive things with meaningful things." The ballroom lights dimmed lower once more until only the dance floor remained softly illuminated beneath the chandeliers. Nathaniel reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and removed the diamond engagement ring Victoria returned earlier on the terrace. He stared at it silently for several seconds before placing it carefully onto the silver tray beside the folded napkins. Emily looked down at the ring resting among ordinary linens and empty champagne glasses. Somehow it looked smaller there, less powerful. "That ring cost more than my apartment building," she said quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. And somehow tonight it still feels worthless. Emily gently pushed the silver tray back toward him. No, her eyes lifted toward his beneath the warm, fading lights. It just finally became honest. Nathaniel stared at her after that without speaking. Then slowly, for the first time all evening, he laughed softly in a way that sounded free instead of controlled. Outside, snow covered Manhattan in white silence while the last chandelier above the ballroom dimmed almost completely. Emily reached for the service card handles, preparing to leave. Nathaniel stepped aside to clear the path for her. Before she walked past him, he spoke quietly into the fading ballroom light. "Emily." She looked up. Nathaniel's expression softened with something deeper than gratitude now. "Respect. Thank you for refusing to become like the rest of us tonight." Emily considered the sentence carefully before answering. The people carrying trays usually notice something important before everyone else. Nathaniel frowned slightly. "What is that?" Emily glanced once around the empty ballroom, where flowers wilted beside abandoned champagne glasses and luxury decorations slowly disappeared into darkness. Then she looked back at him calmly beneath the final chandelier glow. "That truth does not care how expensive the wedding is." Then she quietly pushed the silver card across the marble floor and disappeared through the service hallway, while Nathaniel Brooks remained alone inside the silent ballroom, watching the woman he once humiliated walk away with more dignity than anyone else in the building ever managed to keep.